And we're back now with our web version, actually a continuation of our over-the-air version of Arkansas Week. Phil Kaplan, I hated to have to interrupt you there, but
That's
the clock's
fine.
catching up with us.
Well, it was the first hearing after the new administration. And we had these two now private lawyers, not from the Attorney General's office, and Terrell Don Hutto had been newly named the commissioner. And at one point, after Jack or I had put on a witness, one of the lawyers, two lawyers that both of us admire very much, and I choose not to name right now, at any rate, start interrogating the witness and going over their criminal history. And Judge Henley, after about the second or third question about this guy's extensive criminal history, looked down and said, "Counsel, do you think that I don't know that these people are convicted felons? Do you think that you need to remind me that they are convicted felons? I suggest you go on to something else." It was, you know, they thought that, and had been apparently under orders from the legislature through the governor, that this was no longer going to be a show and tell. This was going to be a real adversary proceeding. And it was until Bill Clinton became the governor.
At what point?
Until Bill Clinton became the Attorney General.
No. At which point, the game, how did it shift? The dynamic of it shift with...
The dynamic became that everything that we wanted to do was resisted. Everything. And that was the reason why it got appealed to the Eighth Circuit and all the way up to the United States Supreme Court.
There was significant, as you mentioned a bit earlier, gentlemen, there was enormous political resistance in the General Assembly. It was more or less, I would assume, the position of the entire state, the General Assembly, to do as little as possible and as slowly as possible, because after all, even then you were talking about enormous increases in public expenditure. You were changing an entire culture down there.
I think there was great public acceptance in the general public and in the media about what Judge Henley had done.
Right.
But it didn't make its way to the state capitol.
Well, we're talking about taxes, we're talking about general revenues, and whoa.
Well, I agree with Phil 100%
Slow it down here.
on that. Yeah, it was not popular at the Capitol, to say the least.
Yeah, I think the entire, as I recall, the entire state was obviously horrified, but then a kind of bell curve effect, there began to be a pushback. Wait a minute, and you heard the terms country club from legislators and from civilians. You know, color TV, air conditioning, comfy beds, and all that. Very few people I can recall had ever been to either institution. To
But nobody who had
a
ever
country
spent
club
a minute there would have used the term country club.
No.
Nobody. And
Regardless of the physical facilities.
or your attitude
were
about somebody who'd been
either,
who was
so.
a convicted felon. I mean, and once the Texas people came, there was a remarkable shift in the way the prison was administered. It was punishment. The punishment was the conviction. It wasn't, you weren't supposed to be punished as an inmate, but they adopted something called Texas TV for an infraction. Texas TV was the inmate, if he had done something that displeased one of the guards, was to stand, I think it was either a foot or 18 inches away from a brick wall, and hands behind their back, and their forehead then against the wall. Leaning against the wall. Well, it was terrible and notorious. The judge quickly put an end to that also. I mean, that was another outrageous something that had been brought up from the Texas system.
Phil Kaplan, you mentioned something earlier ago that I'd like to clear up, simply because we're dealing here sometimes with an audience that wasn't around 50 years ago. And that was mention of the Tucker telephone, which may have been one of the more outrageous inventions since Alexander Graham
Right.
Bell invented it. This was an old crank telephone, or the guts of it anyway, with a crank that would generate a current. I'll let one of you gentlemen take it from there.
Well, what they would do is, if they needed to invoke some punishment, they would wire up an inmate and shock them by cranking up the phone, and sometimes shocking private parts.
The genitals. This was
Yes,
attached
it
to
was
the
attached.
genitals often.
So the wires that came off of this generation were attached to the genitalia.
Yeah. But see, that leave no marks. A
Physical
punishment.
mark.
Just like the Texas TV.
Yeah,
It
strap
was
did that.
punishment with no marks.
Right.
And the
Well-
same thing, well, the strap, of course, had marks. And as I recall, you know, actually, Judge Henley was he's a very strict person, and I think when they had the strap, he limited it to 10 licks.
Yeah.
That was in '66 or '7.
Yeah,
I
it went
think,
up.
yeah, when he
It
did
went up to the 8.
Right, yeah.
It went to the 8th Circuit, and the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals said, no, I think it's 0. I think we need to put it up on a rack and forget it.
Yeah.
So, but he was a disciplinarian. He wasn't just somebody to come in and turn a system upside down. And along that line, he never, ever imposed anything on us as far as directions, except
No.
on one occasion is when, and I'll let Phil tell that story, when in the black barracks, the inhabitants took over the barracks and were setting up a riot. But he just, we got the writs and everything, and he gave us free passage on anything and everything. And like Sarver told us when we were first there, you know, I'm under instructions that you guys can come down any time and go any place on the premises and see what you need to see. And but on the other, Judge Henley did call Phil, myself. I was on reserve duty at the Air Force Base, and said they were about to set a riot up. You guys need to get down there quick and see what you can do.
Jack, I frankly don't remember that.
Oh, Phil, you got to remember that. No, I'm gonna tell the story.
Well, you can tell it then, and
Yeah.
you should, because you're going to need to remind me.
No, well, we both got that problem. Turned out fair play.
Indeed.
No, when we got down there, Phil, we were briefed by Sarver, and they had held a couple of free world guards hostage there in the black barracks. So Phil said, well, let me just go down there and talk to them and get this thing squared up. In essence, said that. And Sarver said, Mr. Kaplan, you know, I'm under instructions. You go any place, any time. And if you want to go down there, you got free passage, but I can't, if they take you custody, I cannot send anyone in to rescue you. Well, this is when I found out that this guy, Phil, he's pretty daggum quick and pretty smart. He immediately said, well, he looked for a minute and said, let's do this. Let's send the word down that they can send a representative in to visit with us, guarantee him free passage in, free passage out. And they brought a nice young man. I think he was out of Jonesboro and then played basketball for school up there, articulate, and Phil worked out the compromises.
Plan B.
Yeah. Now, if
Well,
you don't remember that, you're just being modest.
Incredible. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
but I thought,
But I'm glad that you brought it up.
yeah, I well remember because Phil, initially, you know, I nearly pulled
I
back
will
when
say-
Phil said, I'll go see him. I said,
When Jack and I went down there and we heard all of these stories, I don't recall ever having one second of fear on anything we ever did there, or any place at the institution. Even when we went into what was then the old death row.
Yeah.
But I don't remember. I do remember interviewing one inmate, and this had to have been before Governor Rockefeller commuted all of the death row sentences. And this was an individual who had been there for some time. He was a black man, and he had been there so long in such terrible conditions. He was sort of ashen. It was a terrible. The whole place was terrible. This sort of was a multiplicity of terrible kinds of events that. I still have a picture in my mind of talking to this individual. I mean, it was just everything that we did there. We just stayed with us because it was so awful, and the judge was so receptive. I mean, he was incredibly receptive to everything that we were trying to do.
Gentlemen, thank you. Jack Holt, Phil Kaplan, thank you for your
our
memories.
pleasure.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Jack, for reminding
Yeah,
me.
thank you,
Yeah,
Phil.
thank you for sharing it with us.
50 years.
50 years.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.
One thing I